Friends of Egerton Ryerson presents.
I like to say half Canadian, half Japanese. My father's side is the side that has been here for many generations. They were kicked out of Scotland in the Highland clearances, and ended up here actually in the same place that uh, the people of the credit were looking for a different place to live, and one of the places they were offered was not easy to farm. So they said no to that one, and then my family got to go there and somehow survived. uh, I I recognize the injustices done to Indigenous people. I've seen it through the comparisons between what my family has gone through in Canada and what the people who were originally here went through. It's for myself. I also have the perspective into Japan. There are Indigenous people in Japan who are to this day being discriminated against very strangely by the government, being forgotten by the people. So I'm not blind to any of this. There are many categories of claims against Egerton Ryerson. The biggest of which is the residential school founding, which is based on one historical document. So essentially, there are some major decisions being made, very big costs to both finances and emotions, that are based on very limited academic research, something that everyone would be able to just find in a couple of Google searches if they didn't trust the stories that are being told to them immediately. I think if I were to meet him in person, he would be slightly annoying. He liked to write with long words, use the most complicated sentences he could. But in general, he had a very, very strong moral structure that he developed himself. He didn't just follow whatever he said. Even in Methodism within the church, he was pretty high up, but he would argue against them for things that made no sense to him. And he completely believed in religious freedom, and the right to education so that everyone could articulate their own interests by themselves. Ryerson got very ill when he was actually about my age, and he almost died and had this sort of, he discovered his purpose in life kind of moment. He ended up going to the people of the Credit, the River Credit, and lived with them for about a year, pretty in depth. He learned their language, he learned their culture, he helped them petition for their fishing rights, things like that. And his friend, Peter Jones, was a prominent figure there and eventually chief. And I think for the time, he had a perspective on Indigenous peoples that other people didn't. And he didn't just live with them and only circulate on them. He saw all sorts of cultures, met all sorts of people, and because of that, a lot of the efforts that he put into Indigenous issues were a lot more personalized and human and respectful, that he didn't actually know what they wanted, but he would support them, which is why it's not so vocal in his writings. It's like he went to England with Peter Jones. He didn't become the hero and he was the one that got their rights back. That isn't what happened to him. For him, it was about supporting the people that were around him. Well, the Friends of Egerton Ryerson formed when the name change was still a question, not really a fact. And we we really did try to correct the record in a way that was not a sort of mob, an angry mob. It was more about what did each of us know, what can we combine, how can we express it best to both the task force and the president of the university. How can we express to people that what they're reading is not true? And although we didn't succeed in stopping the name change, I'm very happy that it continued past that, because that means that our cause is more about historical accuracy. Lynn McDonald is a very strong woman. She is very smart. Knowing that it is a very difficult argument to make as an individual, you have to have some sort of backing behind you. Like someone like me, I was a fashion student who already doesn't get much credit. There was no way that people would sit there and listen to me. Ron Stagg brought me into this group. I met people like Lynn McDonald who have the credibility and the knowledge to express these opinions, and actually facts, but I'll say opinions, to people that need to hear them. So at the end of July in 1846, there was a conference that was written as the Conference of the Narrows. It was in Aurelia, and it had the chiefs or representatives from most of the indigenous groups around Upper Canada, Ontario. They all just came together to talk about how they were going to progress in this boom of Europeans and colonization and stuff. And there were government representatives there from the Department of Indian Affairs. Those two representatives were a Captain Anderson, who was a stand-in, and George Varden, who becomes a very prominent character in this story. The person talking mostly for the Indigenous side was Peter Jones. He had a strong connection to the government already, and he was, he spoke both languages. So the idea was to have a school in each community, within each community, and that school would teach probably bilingually, definitely not English only, both Indigenous knowledge and European knowledge, so that they could keep up with the times. This specific topic wasn't really elaborated on within the conference notes, but it was important enough that Varden wrote to Ryerson after the conference. Ryerson, who was I think superintendent of education or something like that at the time, to ask for advice on what sort of curriculum, what knowledge, things like that, little details that probably he was going to use to sell it to the government, to sell the idea. Ryerson was busy at the time setting up the entire public education system for Ontario, so he wrote back a year later, which is the letter of 1847, which was a handwritten letter, but 50 years later, it was retyped into a document by accident. But in this case, he had said in order to do this curriculum, you would need the children to board at the school, which was within the communities, just context, to board within the school for time reasons completely. But you would need to make available any religious places of worship, or like times. You need to make it available for each student as they need. If there's an Anglican student, they should be able to go to an Anglican church. If there's a Methodist student, they should be able to go to a Methodist meeting or something. So it was well thought out, and at the end even he said, I've probably said too much, but this is my little piece of advice. If you have the time to come to a meeting, or just write a letter to us, write an email to us about your questions, we will be able to answer your questions.